Hey, hi everyone. So today we are just going to talk a little bit about data strategy and look at a framework that can help everyone in case you're looking to implement some sort of a data strategy within your business. I am the VP of Professional Services working out of the Toronto office for Click Data. Along with me, I have Telmo Silva, who's the CTO at Click Data and also our acting Chief Data Officer. So I've invited him to the webinar so he can give his set of inputs on what kind of data strategy we use at Click Data and how what are some of the challenges while implementing a data strategy, what kind of budget he allocates and everything. So we'll try to get some conversation going at the end with Telmo to get his feedback. But first things first is want to make sure that everyone can hear me okay. Just an audio and video check. We're sharing a screen. So if you can't see a screen right now, a deck that is being shared, please put it on the chat. In case you have any questions during the webinar, after the webinar, you can always put that on the chat box on the right-hand side. And the webinar is also recorded and it's going to be available to you guys on our YouTube channel and on our website. So let's get started. On the agenda today, we want to take back and just have a look at when did it all start? Why the need for data strategy was ever started? And we're going to go back prehistoric and really try to understand why did it start. Then we'll also have a look at what is data strategy along with a framework that we can potentially use for different businesses and try to understand the impact of this strategy on a business. What are the challenges that you could have? And we'll end the webinar with a round of question and answers or a discussion with Telmo. So really the first signs of data collection or recorded data collections go back to 4000 BC, where the Sumerians decided to have clay tablets as a way to keep a track of transactions and records that are happening on a daily basis. So basically, they used to have tax records there. If you are trading a property, if you're trading a land, they'll have those records on clay tablets, which was a great thing. At least there was a record. If, let's say, John, 20 years down, wanted to check who owned the property, they could go back to the clay tablets and have a look at who owned the property and who the property was transferred to. But imagine doing this for thousands of people, doing this for 10,000s of people. Very soon, you're going to have 10,000s of clay tablets, which you're going to keep on your archives, and going through and finding the right record is going to be a nightmare. So that's where really the data strategy comes into play, where we need some sort of organization. We need some sort of method to organize stuff. We need to look forward how we're going to consume the data and really start organizing this information together. A little bit more about data, just an evolution of how we've gone from that clay tablets to where we stand today. Really, in 1450s, that's when the printing press was invented, which was a great leap because we started recording data on a printed format. Then the 1790s, when the first census was conducted, which was a way to collect mass data. Imagine a census collection data for millions of people, and that's when we had enough data to start organizing this information. 1940s is when the computer was developed, and when we moved to 1990s, that's when internet was really evolved and allowed sharing of data across different networks. In 2000, just recently, is when we have gotten into machine learning algorithms, and now we have a wave of AI, which is dependent on big data and data collection that has happened over the past few years. To give you an idea of the scale of data that we are collecting, on average, around 2.5 quintillion bytes of data is generated every day. And a surprising figure is 90% of this data was just generated in the last 2 years. So no matter what business you are in, you are collecting and generating data at an enormous rate today. You have so much information, and if you want to capitalize on that information and get some insights out of it, you need to look forward and you need to have a plan on how you're going to consume that information that you're generating on a daily basis. So that's where we start looking into a data strategy. In simple terms, really, what data strategy is, you need to look at the business through a data lens. It's as simple as that. Everything that you're doing, every plan that you're doing, make sure you have a perspective of the data you've collected and how the data is going to be utilized. It's not a short-term plan. It's really a long-term plan, which requires people, which requires processes around, which requires technology and different kinds of technology that you're going to depend on. But eventually, whenever you start this journey of data strategy, you have to make sure that there is a specific use case and there's a problem that you want to address. Without a use case, trying to get a strategy is not going to yield anywhere. Start with the use cases, maybe 4 or 5 use cases that you have. Figure out how can we get solutions to those use cases and start drafting your data strategy around that particular use case. So there's a framework that I tend to use internally whenever we're working with different organizations on trying to create dashboards or reports for that particular organization. The simple strategy is going to answer 4 key questions: what, how, why, and who. There's 6 main pillars to this particular strategy. It's identify, map, governance, classify, insight, and culture. And we're going to deep dive into each of this section one by one. So let's start first with identification. Really, what we want to start is categorizing your data. Today, you are consuming data for a normal business. You have marketing activities, you have sales activities, you have the operation activities, you have multiple divisions and departments within your organization. Further, each division department is collecting data using few different sources. So we're going to start categorizing the data at the very top level. Rather than getting into functional use cases, let's just have a look at what are the data sets that we are using. A simple way to look at that is local, cloud, and application data. We have cloud storages today like Dropbox, Box, Google Drive. Are you guys storing any files on those particular cloud storages? We have cloud databases with Azure, with Microsoft, with AWS. Are you using any of those services and storing cloud storages there? We have an FTP storage, SFTP storage. In terms of local data sets, are you using any databases? And you also want to check, are there any scanned items that you're storing on a regular basis? Or are there any applications that are not cloud and that store the data onto files, which could be useful for your business on a daily basis? And eventually, we'll look at all the different applications all these functional departments are using. Typically, marketing will end up using social media applications. Sales team are going to use CRM applications. Your operations will most likely have an ERP application. So really start categorizing your data into these different buckets and just put down a list of data sets that you know after discussing with the team. What are these data sets and how do you classify this? Once you've done the identification of the data sets, we move on to the next step, which is mapping those data sets together. Each application or each business department ends up talking with each other in one way or the other. I want to highlight here an example where, for a SaaS company like us, where we are trying, or actually, let's go with a production company who might be selling a specific product online. They have multiple channels. They have marketing channels, they have a sales channel, they have an operations channel. The marketing typically happens on Google Analytics and Facebook, which generates leads. The leads are then pushed into a CRM. So that's where we start identifying or mapping these concepts where a Google Analytics data or a Facebook data has generated a contact. Can we tag this contact in such a way that we understand this lead came from a particular source, particular medium? These contacts are fed to the salespeople. salespeople discuss with these contacts, they create deals. They do certain bookings to advance through different sales cycle. And eventually they sell products to this particular contact. The product that we are selling is tied in with the manufacturing. You cannot sell a product if the manufacturing has not created a product. You cannot sell a product that the manufacturing doesn't have in their catalog or in their SKU. So that's how the product that the sales team is using is tied into the manufacturing, ideally with a product ID. So there is always a relationship between different applications and different departments. And you need to start mapping out how each application is connected to the other application. What's a primary key there? What's a foreign key? And if we had to combine all these data together, can we present a compelling story by joining everything together in one single place? Once you have that, you need to start setting some policies and procedures into place. So that's your governance piece. The data that is collected, there has to be some integrated to it. You are collecting data through the entire life cycle. Is the data that is collected correct? Is it clean? If not, how can we set business rules in place so that we can easily identify incorrect data and make quick corrections? An incorrect data is not of any use to derive any business insights. If you translate this incorrect data up the channel and you start reporting on this incorrect data, you're most likely going to take business actions that don't yield into appropriate results. So we have to make sure that there is integrity in place and there are different policies and procedures set to ensure this integrity. Then the second piece is, in terms of governance, is security. You're dealing with confidential information, personal information, private information. You need to make sure that the data is accessible by the right person and at the right time. There are a lot of regulations today, the GDPR regulations. There is the California Act regulations, and you have to be compliant with those particular regulations. We're also going to talk later with Telmo and understand what are the different regulations that we could look into and how we can tackle those while creating a data strategy. In terms of responsibility and accessibility, just setting these policies and procedures is not really going to help. You need to make sure that is someone accountable for. There are different ways of doing that, assigning an entire team to be accountable for, assigning an entire individual to be accountable for. There are different frameworks and different structures around that. So the key point here is, if you're setting up a data strategy, you have to make sure that someone is responsible for that particular data strategy and is accountable for those actions. The next thing we're going to look at is classifying this data. So far we have done identification and mapping of the data set. The mapping that we did was at a very functional level to identify what's the relationship between a sales team and a marketing data. But there is a need to do some functional classification and data segregation as well. The data that you're collecting, is it internal versus external? Is that structured versus unstructured? Few example of what a structured data and unstructured data is. If you have data that is coming in from a database, it's typically a structured data. But if you're collecting feedback, you're having reviews that are written on your competitor's website, on your website, on certain platforms, that's unstructured data. You need to classify this different buckets of data so you know what kind of strategy can be applied to those data to get some meaningful insights. There's also quantitative and qualitative. Again, a customer review would be a qualitative data, quantitative would be focused on the numbers. Sometimes there's static data, like we're talking about different regions in a particular sales strategy. That is typically a static data where you define a country into different regions, and then you're focused on that particular different region. So you need to identify what that static data is, which does not change quickly over time. And eventually there's an application-based data and a use case-based data. So if you've identified a use case or a problem, you're trying to classify that data that this could be related to that particular use case. And if you've identified an application that needs to be done for that data that you're collecting, how you can apply it, you're classifying into application-based data sets. So those are the different classification methods that you could end up using as you move along your data journey. Any data that you collect or set policies and procedures is meaningless unless your business can now use that data in some sort of format. We have different tools today. We have reporting tools, you have business intelligence tools, data analytics tools that could help you to generate some meaning out of this data that you're collecting. Typically, that starts with a business implementation plan. The way we do it is for a business intelligence implementation plan, the first thing you have to do is identify the stakeholders. Let's say we're trying to create a dashboard for the sales team. The stakeholders in that case could be your regional sales manager, your sales director, your account executive, your BDRs. Those are the stakeholders who are going to consume this particular data. Then you start by defining the objective. For each level, try to understand what are the problems that they're trying to solve, what is the information that they're trying to look, and what information would help them take business decisions on a daily basis. Once you have these two key things identified, the stakeholders and the objectives that they're trying to address, that's when you start defining the KPIs that could be useful for them. Eventually, you display the KPIs on a dashboard and you start sharing this information with the stakeholders. So this is the right way of gathering some insights from the data that you've collected over time. The data that you've classified, the data that you've identified, eventually has to translate into some sort of insights. The last thing on this framework is setting up a culture. Today, data strategy cannot be seen as just a one-off thing. You cannot start just initially set up a strategy and forget about it. It has to be embedded into your organization's culture. The vision that you set for your organization has to be data-centric. The different ways of setting up a culture that is data-driven. First thing is define what is the benefits for individuals. When you're setting up goals and objectives for a year for a particular individual, have a section that defines the benefits that they would achieve if they take data-driven decisions. Do the same for the teams. If you're setting up objectives for the entire team, how can we enforce or how can we promote that the team ends up taking data-driven decisions? Everything has to be incentivized in some way. Either it could be rewards, either it could be monetary benefits. There has to be incentivization that needs to be done for these actions. And if a team or individual is consistently showcasing a data-driven decision approach, we need to incentivize in some way, and it has to have it. We need to have that framework ready so that we can incentivize in the right way. And eventually, a data strategy would not work if there's not enough collaboration between different team members. If you're setting up objectives for the sales team, you have to look into the marketing team, you have to see the sales team and set up KPIs that define their success together rather than individual silos. Doing it in individual silos is one of the biggest challenge that you would end up having while setting up a data strategy, and just having collaborative metrics for different teams together will promote that and ensure that you don't work in individual silos. If you do that, really, what's the point? Why do you think you should set up a data strategy? The three main benefits: it helps making improved decision making. And when I say improved decision making, you're not making decisions out of your gut anymore. You're not making decisions of incorrect data. You're really looking at your historic data. You have a valid reason why you're making a certain decision. If you're doing A/B testing, you know why the test A worked better than test B. And that's what the data strategy is going to help you. It's going to help you increase efficiency. Operations, or when I talk about efficiency, it's not just operations, but typically a production line would not be efficient if they didn't have enough data to understand what process in that particular production line needs to be optimized. So looking at the data, they can take that decisions. And the same goes for efficiency across different processes. We've been talking about sales and marketing. If we see that the lead time to convert a specific potential prospect to a customer is 20 days, the data will help us understand what step of that particular sales cycle is taking the longest. And eventually we can make decisions to quickly decrease that particular sales cycle. Everything is going to translate to increased revenue. If you make decisions faster, if you make accurate decisions, if you work faster, you would see an increase in the revenue for your business. And a data-driven strategy eventually just helps do a better customer service. Your product is data-driven. If you're creating iterations of your product, you're looking at the past data, you're seeing what your consumers like, what your consumers don't like, and you're iterating your product in that way. So that's why it's very important that you look forward while setting up a vision for your organization, for your team. You're trying to set up a vision that is based on the data-driven decisions that you make. As you go ahead and try to do this, it's not going to be a smooth ride always. We will soon hear from Telmo some of the challenges that he might have faced or some of the inputs that he could give. But some of the typical challenges that we've seen organizations face is data silos, working individually or working with outdated data, not having an outlook how your different departments are going to talk with each other. How is the engineering team going to get feedback from my sales team? How is my production team going to get the feedback from my sales team? If the sales team collects all the feedback, or if the customer success team collects all the feedback, if there's no way to translate that feedback into something tangible for the product team, they cannot make iterations. So you have to think an outlook for an entire organization and a collaborative outlook for different departments rather than working individually and having data silos created. And as you start the implementation process, you would find many areas where unknowingly you start working in silos, and you have to make a consistent effort that that doesn't happen. The second challenge, what we've seen a lot of organizations face, is lack of resources. Setting up a data strategy is not a one-time job. It's not a part-time job. It is a full-time effort that someone has to take. That's why one of the key things on the governance is there has to be an accountability. Someone has to be responsible for it. You have to define a role within your organization in some way or the other that takes that responsibility, and it cannot be treated as something that someone does naturally. You need planned resources, planned personnel for this particular execution. And the third piece is budgeting. When you're forward looking for an entire year, we have budgeting for production, we have budgeting for employee salary, we have budgeting for events, everything else, but we never have a budgeting for data. There is a budgeting for technology, but not for a data strategy. Data strategy does take time, it does take a resource. So put it on your plan. When you're setting up your financial plans for the next few years, have some budget allocated for the data strategy so that someone can actually spend time and start implementing it together. And eventually, it's one challenge we've seen is not committing it, doing it one time and forgetting about it, or just doing it once every 3 years. It's an evolving process. You cannot do it once. You have to keep changing your strategy, you have to keep modifying your strategy, and you have to consistently keep working on it. That's why having a resource, having a budget is very essential for this entire process. That's a very brief overview of some of the elements of data strategy. The different frameworks and different ways you could look into data strategy. Some talk a little bit more on data governance, some focus on data insights. But the key points are always try to answer what, how, why, and who, and identify your data, set policies in place, gain insights. Those are the three main pillars that you should look at while setting up a data strategy for your organization. With this, I'm also going to invite Telmo to talk a little bit more about his experiences so that he can share as a CTO in the organization and as an acting chief data officer also for Click Data. Telmo, how do you really address the responsibilities question? What are different ways people can assign responsibilities for data strategy?
Well, yeah, I think the way we do it at Click Data, which is potentially a little bit more complex because we handle three types of data. A normal company would typically handle, internal data, right? Whether it's your sales data, CRM, financial data, and then potentially handle employee data or vendor data, and that would be it. In a regular business, that would be it. In addition, we not only do that, but we also handle data that we don't know what it is, right? We're handling data for customers that are using our platform as data. And obviously, that's not part of our data framework, but it has to be part of our strategy to assist these customers to make sure that the platform supports them in their data strategy. So what we decided early on to do is to tie our data framework strategy with our compliance strategy, because first of all, it allows us to fully utilize the resources that we have in terms of, we have to do compliance, whether it's SOC or ISO or GDPR or any privacy, health or personal privacy act or regulatory programs. We have to do those things. We have to show who has access to the data, what is the data, classification of the data, the backup strategy, etc. So all that has to be formulated and audited on a yearly basis, if not more. So by embedding that into that process, we ensure that it gets done, that it has allocated resources, and that there's already responsibilities defined. At least one person, usually the data protection officer or the chief data officer, whoever, however you want to name this, ultimately the responsible, is ensuring that both upper management and the whole company in a whole is working towards compliance, is at the same time achieving data governance, right? And data and proper data strategies. So by baking it into the process is the best way, right? Now you may not want to bake it into the compliance process. You can bake it in, and I think you alluded to this, to your sales process, or to ensure that you get good results, right? Certain type of results. You can put this into employee performance, etc. But my finding is that usually that it constitutes a very low part of their performance bonus or compensation. So it's so minimal that in fact it's almost not worth doing it just for the time spent on it. So by baking it into something more or at least more important for the company, for the sake of the company, which is compliance, then you're ensuring yourself a better result.
So you did allude, I think one of the titles is something that people could think of as a chief data officer, and I've also heard there are solutions delivery teams who ensure data integrity that can be deployed. A question that I think we get asked a lot about this responsibility is, let's say you have a chief data officer, but is it essential that the data team that you're sitting within an organization is a separate team, or is it a good idea or a good approach to have one person in each team responsible for data. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think there is the right answer to anything like that. In terms of that, depends a lot in terms of where the company is located, how it handles the data, etc. Right? I mean, we started off in a very centralized approach at Click Data, and now we're more into regions, and in each region, it will be, let's put it this way, it'll be impossible from a data compliance point of view as we're growing, and we're comparatively a very small company compared to to much larger companies than ours. But we have already sitting in the hundreds of systems for internal use, not to mention our own platform, which is hosted in so many different regions, that we have to comply with all these things, whether it's payroll or taxation or the customer's data protection, etc. requirements. So all that in itself is a huge amount of amount of work just for one central team, even, and to have that understanding, right? I mean, we started with protection, privacy, like HIPAA or GDPR. Right now, we have over, I believe, last I've checked, about 57 different GDPR-like privacy regulations around the world in states and provinces, right? So it's only going to get more complex. And in essence, they're all the same, but in that, your data strategy needs to fit into each one of those, right? And you need to classify them according, potentially, with each regional regulatory body structure. So with that, I don't think it will be possible to have a central, one person is holding the stick, kind of saying, okay, I'll take care of that. It has to be diluted across your organization in the different departments or different regions or different geographies, however the company is better structured, right?
Yeah, I think that's what we also end up typically recommend. Have one person accountable for it. At least there has to be one key person identified who is the central fort holder. But then you have to have a responsibility shared amongst different teams, different regions, because unless a marketing data is compliant with the way the sales is gathering that information, the data will not talk with each other. There has to be some functional responsibility given to each department as well. Then the other question, I think,
because you can have certain flexibilities in certain regions that you don't have in others, right? You mentioned marketing data and emailing, for example, right? Where in some countries it may be okay to email, people that don't opt in to begin with. In other countries, you don't have that facility, right? So why should you suffer it by setting up a company-wide regulation that affects other regions or other teams that potentially don't have those blocks, right? And vice versa, right? Where you may need, if you have a too lax of a data strategy that does not categorize the data properly, that does not follow the data lineage properly, and but in some entities you do need that. One size does not always fit all. So you will need to have some variations in terms of where that data, what that data, and who is using that data.
Got it. And another question we get asked often, and I find it a very difficult question to answer. Like, is there a right number to budget for data strategy? I think it's if someone asked you that, how would you typically answer that question?
I don't think we can, obviously, but I think the first step is to at least budget, a solid team, and by a solid team, I mean somebody that has a C-level, or at least a participation in the leadership of the company, an influence at that level. You will need a strong data analysis type of person, and again, I'm just thinking of one unit kind of thing, and you're going to need a strongly technical database, even application, whether it's Click Data or whether Python or things like that, and that constitutes the minimal team. Potentially, you definitely need potentially also a somebody more leading into documentation and process and project management to ensure that that all ties in and that kind of gets documented. So right off the bat, you need to look at a 2 or 3 person team minimum to budget for, to ensure that you will get success out of this. Otherwise, and I do think that's, a lot of people think, well, there's a lot of money involved. Well, I think there's obviously the salaries involved with these people, the FTEs, but without having somebody doing this, year round, you're not going to get anything done. You're going to be working on a case by case or a need by need analysis, and there will be one-time solutions. And we've seen that happen a lot in our case, where people come with a specific problem, we solve it, and then that's it. They move on to the next thing. And that's fine too. I mean, if that's the way you want to deal with things, but that does not a strategy make, right? So
yeah. And I'd like to add to that. I think one of the key issues that we've seen across when we work with clients, they do come to us with use case. There's a requirement to address a specific business problem, get insights out of that business problem, and create a dashboard. But what they fail to do is budget on their end who is going to maintain or who is going to be the subject matter expert of that dashboard. Because maybe I'm working with the sales executive, sales manager today, and we end up creating a dashboard based on the KPIs that the sales manager defined. The sales manager leaves tomorrow. Now, no one in the team knows how this particular KPI was defined because no one actually budgeted time for the sales manager to do the documentation or train someone else. And very soon, that whole dashboard falls down because no one understands what that particular KPI means. And every manager will have its own perspective of what that KPI should mean. So just having sales by target, a simple ratio, managers could look at it different ways. And you need someone to define it. You need someone to document it. And above all, you need to budget that this person will be doing it. So make sure that you include it in your budgeting. And unfortunately, there's no right number for that. There should be a percentage for everyone's budget that's included into budgeting that goes to data strategy.
I think to that it also depends how much involvement management once again takes into that, right? Because if you have that type of discrepancy, at the operational level as to what a KPI means or how this gets calculated, then that means potentially that is not enforced on a day-to-day basis, right? It is very much ad hoc. That only comes up at compensation time or at review time or on quarterly basis, right? But if you bake that in to your daily processes and you hammer that in on a daily basis at all levels, then those type of discussions become less need of documenting them, but rather, it becomes part of your daily lingo, right? What's your MRR today? What's your churn? What's your whatever, right? Profitability, etc., right? How many leads you have in a pipeline? That no definitions need to go beyond that, right? I think one of the biggest challenges that happen though is the variety or the way that systems change over time, right? And then the metrics kind of change, right? Or the meaning of the data in the database, right? We've had a lot of different cases where things like Google Analytics change the meaning of what a visitor is on a website, right? Or versus a user versus a session, right? This happened earlier on, but it continues to happen, and all of a sudden you see your numbers shift. Historically, they meant something, and then now they mean something else. And that type of historical dimensioning of data is a challenge, right? Because you're trying to compare, one to the other, and the meaning behind the data, the KPI and the understanding of it stays the same, but the value itself has changed of a significant nature, and that is a challenge, right? And that happens if you upgrade systems sometimes. That happens as you evolve processes in your company. So there's a lot of other challenges that come with with having a a data strategy in your company, and if you don't have, again, somebody that's on top of that all the time, then how are you aware that something has changed? It's always reactive, right? Why is my dashboard like this today, right? Why is my dashboard 0 today? It was fine before.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's because this or that was added or changed, etc. So all these things need to be more proactive rather than reactive.
Right. And just looking at the time as well, making sure we respect everyone's time. Last question for you is there a right time to use or create a data strategy for your organization? What would you say to that?
I don't think there's a right time. I think it's evolving process. To me, it's a compliance. I tie it in with compliance. Compliance is not, are you certified? Yes or no. It never is like that. It is, we go through the auditing process. Yeah, we have these processes in place, and we're at 87%, and we're going to strive to be at 89% next year, or 90 or 100, right? And it's a continuously evolving. And by the way, the target keeps moving, right? As new technology comes on board, as more volume of data comes on board, more different types of data. I mean, just look at ChatGPT, just blew everything out of the water, right? The amount now of data that we're generating in terms of requests and replies has just evolved so much that we just moved the bar like so much higher, right? And now we have to catch up to it. You have to start early, and you have to continuously, even if it's just about a small step, start there. Start having a system that tells you where's your master data lying, what are your key master records and master fields, and then evolve there and make sure that that's tied in with documentation of sorts that is also logged and change logged.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Thelma. I think really what we wanted to talk and tell today is, if you have not thought about data strategy, the right time is now. It's today. Right now, you start thinking about that. When should you use a framework, or when should you stop using a framework? You should use the framework always. You should never stop using a framework, because you're going to onboard new technology, you're going to onboard new processes, you're going to onboard something or the other new, and it's a ever evolving process that you're going to go through. So always try to create a culture that actually focuses on this data-driven decision, and you would see very soon that taking actions for your business is going to get easier and easier as you collect the right data, as you clean the right data, and you have a process or a strategy on how to use that data.
If I can just one last thing, do not use clay tablets to store your data. Rain or dropping them will fairly much destroy your data strategy. So avoid data, clay tablets.
So your data strategy should not be clay tablets. I think that's the key point that we're trying to give. So good luck, everyone, on your data journey. Feel free to reach out to Collect Data if you have any questions, either through support at support@collectdata.com. If you want to reach out to the sales team to discuss more, you can reach out at sales@collectdata.com. And we'll be happy to just have a word with you, understand where you are today on your journey, and see how we can help you get further along. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks, Trey. Bye.
Bye.